we're here in Waitara. So let's start with Waitara. How significant was Waitara in the Taranaki Wars?
Well, I've heard Waitara called the flashpoint of the wars, or the start of the wars in Taranaki. I've heard Waitara used as, it all seems a little out of context for me about Waitara and the wars. This is where the Crown started their war on us. But I think their war started a lot earlier than the flashpoint of Waitara, March in 1860. There was a lot of work behind the Crown's intention to cause problems for us in order to manipulate their own outcomes.
Tell me about that manipulation process in the lead up to what happened here in Waitara. What were some of the ways that the Crown manipulated Māori here?
There was a lot of politicking by Crown agents between our rangatira here in Waitara. They were looking for an opportunity to exploit any kind of argument they could in order to, divide our people or cause problems for our people. Of course, when we look at the population of our people at the signing of the Te Ātiawa Waitangi, we outnumbered the Pākehā. After a lot of the things they did, like the introduction of the gun, the introduction of disease, the introduction of the waves of settlers, they sort of like whittled our numbers down until we were on a par equal with each other. By 1860, the population of Māori in Aotearoa had been reduced, and the constant arrival of the Pākehā meant that not only were we of same numbers, but we were in more disarray, and they had arrived in a much orderly fashion. So kicking a war off in 1860 wasn't about who was arguing with who in Waitara, but that the population numbers had levelled to the point where it was strategically the right thing to do for the Crown and their colonisation process.
Yeah, maybe that's a good place to start then with Te Teira and Te Rangitake, in terms of, you know, the history books would have us believe that it was just a whānau dispute between the two of them, but you know, you think it was more strategic?
Yeah, you could take any argument between two people, politic between them, and make them fight in order to get the outcome you want, and that basically was the Crown's strategy with Whiti Te Rangitake and Te Teira Manuka. They were relations. Their parents had fought together. Their parents had grown up together. Te Teira later said that he only intended to sell his small piece of the peka peka, that he didn't intend for the whole lot to be sold. But it was always a case of the Crown taking advantage of a situation and making it much bigger. The divisions they caused during those years are still felt within our town today, within our families.
What were some of the strategies they used to divide and conquer Māori here?
Well, in the first instance, there was never agreement to sell any land in Waitara. I mean, if you go to the time when Pākehā first interacted with us and the idea of buying land in Waitara came up, the answer was no. That was from our ariki, from our rangatira. Almost a unanimous decision that no more land should be sold. There's a pou out at New Plymouth there called Pou Tūtaki, which was erected not long after Manua Pou to make that point. There would be no more land passed here. This was the focus of the arguments of the day. The word from our rangatira, the word from Rere Tauwhangawhanga of this marae, of Manukorihi, of Ngātiawa, was no. There was no land for sale. We even signed the Te Ātiawa Waitangi down in Waikanai. Our rangatira and our ariki signed it down there. When I look at the internet record of that document, there's like 80 rangatira from North Taranaki that signed the Te Ātiawa Waitangi down in Waikanai. And so there was a full expectation that there was an honourable document, and everyone signed it in the full understanding of our Indigenous version. So when they started surveying lands up here and looking to buy lands, our people moved home. It wasn't just any old move home. Our life was good down there. Business was good down there. On his deathbed, Rere tā whangawhanga directed his son to go home and hold the lands for the widows and orphans. And so the dutiful son then made arrangements with the people to move home and hold our lands in Waitara, under great threat from Governor Gray, who threatened to burn their boats, who threatened them all kinds of harm, and he also told them that he would destroy their identity or take their identity away from them. So Rangitake and the other rangatira of North Taranaki here, of Waitara, came home to hold the lands. They came home and they were even directed by the Crown in that day, or the Crown agents, on which side of the river they should live on, whether they should live on the north side or the south side. And although it was none of their business, they were well involved with trying to direct things on the return of our people.
What do you think Rangitake and the others came home to?
Well, they'd left some years before. They'd left in the 30s and the 20s, and they'd come home in the 40s and 50s, so there's a couple of decades. They've come home to our people, their relations, holding on.
The ahika.
I don't know what they came home to, but it was still our whenua when they came home.
Rangitake, how's he remembered? What kind of leader was he?
I don't know, I have to work backwards, because when he died, Rangitake was in his 90s, and he died barely 2 months after the sacking of Parihaka. And so after everything that he'd been in 1882, in January 1882, when he died, he said, "The land is gone. I've done what my father asked me to do. I just want to be left alone." So from the time that his father died in the mid-1840s, right up to the early 1880s, he had simply done what his father had asked him to do, to hold the lands in Waitara. And I guess with the sacking of Parihaka, there was some deep sadness in him that we had not managed to do that as well. So he was a dutiful son.
People say he was also a diplomat, and he had a skill with dealing with Pākehā.
I guess he didn't have skill with dealing with Pākehā as much as he had a consistency with his word. And his word was that of his father. And their word was, "There's no land for sale here." He was known by the Pākehā for having saved Wellington from the wrath of Rangihaiata, that he had stopped on a couple of occasions a brutal attack on the people in Wellington. So he was a peaceful man. He didn't think that war was the best way to deal with things. He came home to hold his lands based on the right, based on the te riti o Waitangi, mostly based on his father's directions. So I don't know if he was a negotiator. He didn't negotiate. He simply told them the truth. This land is not for sale. So in order for the Crown to change that, they had to cause a division within the people. That was enough for them to say, here is the rangatira of Waitara who wishes to sell his lands. Here is Whiti Te Rangitake, who is trying to block people from rightfully selling their own lands. It was widely acknowledged back then and today that he was the only one that could allow the land to be sold or otherwise. And he was, he didn't budge.
He operated alongside Hapurona. How did they differ in their leadership?
I guess Hapurona had a different experience in war. Hapurona had been up in the far north, and so that experience in fighting the Pākehā came to the fore as a person we needed when we were invaded by the British Army.
He was a tactician?
Absolutely, he's a tactician. It seems that the tactics that our people had back then when fighting against larger numbers and more guns was to make a stand, let the opposition expend their energy and then tactically withdraw to the next place. And so our people were constantly preparing the next place to withdraw to. When Peka Peka was attacked, I think they'd given them several hours of clear attack before there was any response. There wasn't a major battle there, as much as it was the major signal that the Crown had started hostilities against us without provocation.
So Te Kohia, would it be fair to say it was a decoy, or it was an opportunity for people to retreat, as you say, moving to the next, always being a step ahead?
Te Kohia was a statement. Te Kohia was a statement by our people in clear view of the Crown's military camp that this is our whenua. You can't just come here and say that we've surveyed it, therefore we've bought it, therefore it's ours. Part of the rules of those days is that you couldn't buy disputed land. One of the rules was that only the Queen could buy land off our rangatira. In that case for Waitara, we were made absolutely sure that people knew that this was a disputed land. Right from the time of the surveyors coming to pick it up to our old people going out and pulling out those survey pegs to show their opposition to it. I think in Robert Parris and Donald McLean tried to say that there was no dispute about the sale of the land at that time, and there absolutely was. So Te Kohia and the building of it and the site of the army camp was for me akin to chopping down a flagpole up north. For a start, it wasn't the British flagpole that rākau belonged to the people up there. The land that their pole was on belonged to the people up there. So they didn't do anything wrong, but that was made into a cause of war. Down here, building a pā up at Te Kohia, or called Te Kohia, to demonstrate ownership, or to demonstrate that this is home and we're not moving, is not an act of war in itself. It's defiance against the Crown. But the government's persistence, I'd like to say the Crown, but really it was the Crown agents like Parris and McLean, the glorified real estate agents, were running around looking to buy land off whoever would sell it. They came to Waitara, they lied about who said it was okay to sell land. They lied in the records about what was said at meetings. There's one instance where Te Teira, and it's hard because I don't want to villainise Te Teira, he has that position within our history where it's easy to say, nā te he. It's not a nice thing for everyone to drag their tupuna's name up every time. The real culprits were the Crown, or the representatives of the Crown, which their sole job was to separate the people from their land. Their sole job was not always about the land, it was about separating the people from the land in order to gain the resources. If you have a look at the timber around here, all the forests that are gone out here, there's no real account of how much timber was taken out of this rohe. When you look at the oil rigs, they started mining for oil in the mid-60s, just a couple of years after the wars in Waitara. The whole rape of Waitara has been about the resources, and they used our people against each other to do that.
Back then and again today?
Still today. We have within our backyard here in Waitara the highest number of oil rigs in the country, and the fight to protect our wāhi-tapu over the years has been an extension of the original land wars, but with the restriction of resources and people in order to stop the rape. So with the regional council and the district council backing them, companies have gained a legal right to take resources from our whenua. The hardest thing about recalling history is that our war hasn't never finished. And so when we look back at the cause of war in the beginning of this kaupapa, it's so many hundreds of years ago, not because of time, but simply because of everything that's happened for almost every generation afterwards, and trying to have the return of our lands, and working against a crown which has no intention of, they have no honour, they have no judiciary that is fair or has justice for us. So most of the things that the Crown has done intergenerationally has simply delayed and deferred justice and replaced it with some kind of a temporary fix-up.
You've talked in the past of the Crown having their boot on the throat of us. Are you able to tell me that, that analogy?
Oh, well, it's not a very positive sort of an example of how we see it, but we know that our rangatira were, if we take a scale, were way up here. This was our land. When the Crown came over here, they were nothing. One or two people come over, but what they brought with them was designed to devastate our people. They brought with them guns for us to play with against each other, to knock our numbers back. They brought with them diseases which they knew from experience in other countries would decimate our numbers. They brought with them new laws. They brought with them the jails. They brought with them all of these things, and they take our rangatira from up here and pull them right down to the ground through their colonisation process. And then they hold our rangatira underfoot for 2, 3, 4 generations until our people forget our reo, forget our history, forget that our position on this lands, and are in such despair that by the time the Crown or the New Zealand government lift their foot, the only thing our people are looking for today is equity. They want to be equal with who? They're equal with everyone else in the community down here. The aspirations to be as our ancestors were have by and large been beaten out of our people. So that's the hardest thing, the process of colonisation itself. The systems that have been set up to disenfranchise us, the systems that were set up to make us unwell, unstable, unable to come together. They're all the systems that the Crown put in place. And today you see on the news, the other day they had the health claims came out with a report, and all of the outcomes in our health are a direct result of everything that the Crown's put in place to hold us down. Nowadays people are talking about, yes, we must do something about this, is terrible. And there's some good people out there, but it's the system, it's the same system that arrived here and disenfranchised our people, created war amongst us and stole all our resources, and it's the same system today that maintains that control by the New Zealand government over our affairs. So,
The last time I was sitting in this whare was with the family of Adam Morihu, and then prior to that was at a tangihanga for Stephen Wallis, and it feels like it can't be coincidental that 160 years ago, the same arm of the Crown, the military arm of the Crown, was firing at your people, and these days, still your people are dying from their gun.
I don't know, every now and again our people are shot. Is it to remind everyone that this is what happens when you step too far out of the square? Stephen Wallis, I remember him as a young man, had a golf club, broke some windows, nothing insurance couldn't fix, and probably his family could sort him out, or even the hapu or the iwi could sort him out, help support him. But he was expressing some valid anger towards, well, it wasn't towards one person. I guess we can't have that conversation with him anymore, but the outcome was to put him down. The outcome was to shoot him. Adam Morihu is another product of being downtrodden. For as bad as people say he was a father. For as terrible as he was within our community, actually he was a cousin. You know, he wasn't a bad guy, he was naughty as. But again, it's just another one who's not fitting in because of the overall colonisation of our people. You remove their reo, you remove their tikanga, and it's replaced with something else. And yeah, that was hit us, and that seems to be the outcome. If you get too far outside of your box, we'll put you down. And I can't say that either of those boys were directly standing up and fighting for the land, but I believe that they are absolute product of the Crown and the New Zealand government's taking of our lands and our resources and taking away our own structures.
Can I take you back to 1860, because you touched on something that I want you to talk about again, and it was the resistance, you know, the showing the Crown that this land was not for taking. So those women and those elderly people who did take away the pegs, tell me about that. What was the motivation behind that, and what did they do?
Pulling out the pegs was a non-violent way of again expressing the disapproval for the sale of our lands. It had already been told to McLean and Robert Paris at a public meeting that our lands aren't for sale, but they still persisted in looking. They even falsified the very records of events. For example, at one particular meeting, they asked Rangitake, whose land is this? And he said, it is Te Ātiawa's, but although it is his, I forbid the sale, or something like that. What he actually said is that although this land belongs to Te Ātiawa, it is no more his than anybody else's here, and we forbid the sale.
And that is the concept, right, of rangatiratanga and whenua?
Yeah, that was quite right. They were putting on a Western-style tenure of our land over the top of our rangatira system. The war in Waitara was really nothing more than, in order to get to the land, you needed to destroy the rangatira system and replace it with something else. And so they caused a war, waged a war, made a peace, and then asked everyone to write their letters into the governor, and he would sort it all out. He's very sorry it all happened, I'm sure we can sort it out. Those letters went into Te Kōti Whakawā Whenua in the early 1860s, and it was quite early then that Judge Fenton and Judge Munro, who weren't actually judges, the commissioners, realised that they didn't have enough land to put the people back onto because they had already paid out the officers and paid out the soldiers land for their efforts. And so to reduce the number of Māori claimants, they created two lists of people. One was those that were loyal to the Crown, and the other was those who were in rebellion against the Queen. Those they slighted as being in rebellion against the Queen was simply left out of the process, and that provided less people to put back onto the land. After they did that, they simply rounded people up and put them into blocks like sheep and fenced them in. Not long after that, everyone ended up down at Parihaka. Whether you were on one side or the other, the Crown's intentions had come to fruition.
What is it like for someone from Waitara to live in a community where you're reminded constantly by the street names and the blocks of lands and the farmers' lands of those men who took your land?
It's not so much the signs on the streets which name Atkinson, McLean, all of them. It's like a war crimes, map of the war crimes. Or it could be a map of the Masonic Lodge members, is really what Waitara is. But the hardest thing is to see rangatira whānau of Waitara still living hard, still not being able to produce their own goods, still not being able to support their own families. I've seen over the years where the social welfare system has undermined families and created a dependence on the Crown which is still there. So these are the sadder things to see Sad to see our kids walking around kicking stones without a clue. It's sad to see an education system that still denies them that knowledge. It's sad to see a judicial system which provides justice to everyone except our own. So every system in this country is set up. We've got the worst statistics for just about everything in the world. And you have to consider that the systems that were set up are getting exactly the outcomes they were set up to achieve. So the street signs, well, that will remind us who the arseholes are. That will remind us who the bad guys are. But the worst thing is to see a people who are slowly being euthanized or being denied who they are. That's the hardest thing to see.